Hello, and welcome to Module 2, Week 2 of Research and Data Analysis. This week, we are covering the Introduction to Quantitative and Qualitative Research. I apologize if you hear my puppy Stanley digging on my bed sheets right now. He barks if he's not in the room with me, so I do apologize about that. Today we'll cover Chapter 4, which is Introduction to Quantitative Research, and we'll cover Chapter 14, which is an Introduction to Qualitative Research. So Chapter 4, what is quantitative research? First, we use it as a unit of analysis where we measure things in quantities. So we use measurement and observation to represent communication phenomena, amounts, frequencies, degrees, values, and intensity. It is all about numbers. And with this type of measurement, we use deductive reasoning. So we select the theory as a basis for hypotheses or research questions, and then we test that within the study. So we start with our purpose and our literature review and move down to our hypotheses and research questions, moving forward to our methods, and then get into validity and reliability as well. With this type of measurement or with this type of research, you are quantifying things, which is why it is all about numbers. So think about your topics. Think about how you might like to collect that data or what way is going to be best. It could be quantitative research design, qualitative research design, or mixed methods. So we will talk about all of those in the futures, but kind of thinking about what is qualitative research and pairing it up with your topic. Then we talk about the foundations for qualitative research. Nope, quantitative research. I am so sorry. First, we talk about a concept. This is the thing that you want to study. It represents numbers of individuals, but also related things. So it is an abstract way of thinking that's going to help us group similar things that are similar to one another and then distinguish them from things that are not similar. We have a conceptual scheme, which is the set of concepts connected together, the construct, which is the theoretical definitions, the variables, which are identification of those constructs. So if I want to measure, let's say I want to measure stigmatism, right? I want to measure how individuals are stigmatized. That might be my concept, but then as a construct, I'm using that theoretical definition. So maybe I want to talk about in-group versus out-group. So that would be intergroup theory. And that theory would come directly from, or not the theory would come from, I apologize, that concept and that conceptual scheme and then the construct would all come from that theory of intergroup theory, okay? So your variables, that's how you identify them. And then the operationalization is how the variable is going to be observed and measured. Are you using surveys? Are you using experimental designs? These are how you are going to observe and measure it within your sample and population. So continuing on, I have these grouped together because it kind of makes a little bit more sense this way. So concepts, each of these are separate concepts, and then you have separate constructs, right? So the constructs are everything coming together. The variables, you list them out. What do I want to study and how? So I want to study stigmatization in neurodivergent individuals. I think that was the example I gave in the topic quiz from last week, right? Calling them neurospicy, or saying, oh, I let my intrusive thoughts win, right? How do I want to study those variables? And so I list them out and find survey measures. And then operationalization is all about putting it together and actually studying it, okay? So we talk about some hypotheses for quantitative research. We have directional hypotheses. These are going to be statements that indicate the nature and direction of the relationship, right? Or if there is a difference. It is very explicit. So what I mean by this is I might predict there will be a decrease in feelings of stigmatization. I don't know how to word that I would do it better, but there will be a decrease, right? I'm saying that people who are neurodivergent are going to feel a decrease in assimilation or an increase in stigmatization, right? I have a direction in which it's going. Non-directional hypotheses state that there's going to be a difference, but it's not necessarily giving the direction. So we might say there will be a difference between neurodivergent and neurotypical individuals when colloquial terms like neurospicy are used, right? I'm not saying that it's going to be increased or decreased from another individual or in another direction. But I'm saying that there's going to be some sort of a difference. The null hypothesis is complementary statements to our research hypotheses. So we hope to reject that null and validate our predicted hypothesis, right? The null is going to state that there is no difference. The null hypothesis would state there will be no difference between neurodivergent and neurotypical individuals when using colloquial slang terms. Okay. Next, let's talk about types of variables. First, a variable is a type of person, place, thing, phenomenon, and it is specifically identified in the research hypotheses or research questions. So we talk about independent variables. They're listed in the slides as IVs. These are variables that are manipulated by the researcher. So this manipulation or the variation is going to cause change in the other variables, giving researchers control over the manipulation. It can be referred to as an antecedent, experimental group, treatment group, causal variables. All of those are going to be interchangeable depending on what you're doing. We also talk about predictor variables or dependent variables. DVs listed in the slides. This is the natural variation to the IV or the independent variable to produce those different effects in the dependent variables. Okay, so there's going to be a variation in independent variables, and that is going to produce effects in dependent variables. Dependent variables are going to be influenced or changed by the independent variables. So it could be referred to as criterion and or outcome variables. When we're talking about quantitative, I apologize, research, there are some issues of reliability and validity that we use as well. So reliability is all about consistent use of data collection procedures. Participants should be reacting similarly to the procedures, and other researchers should be able to use the same measure in another project with comparable participants and results, right? To say that something is reliable is to say that it has stood the test of time. It has made sense in multiple studies that are similar but not the exact same. Validity is when the measurement does what it is intended to do. So it is related to truth, meaning the technique is valid at uncovering the reality of the concept. And the more valid it is, or that makes it, the more valid it is. So what I mean by that is if I say I am measuring stigmatization, then I need to make sure that my measures are actually valid, that they have been through the proper chain of command, so to speak, in order to be something that we don't necessarily have to do exploratory factor analyses, which we'll get into later in the semester. There are some threats to reliability and validity, though. First, the variation due to the factors might not be measured in the research study, so we could have variation from some outside factor altogether. Second, the variation could be due to personal factors, such as participant mood, fatigue, their own personal health, time of day, and so on. If you are collecting data and you are not using a convenience sample like an undergraduate student population, you find that it is harder to get those results. I collected data for a study about colloquial terms being used in concussions and head injuries of athletes. And I was asking that journalists report back on my survey measures. This was a problem because they were doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They weren't receiving any compensation and they were working full-time jobs, which is why they were in my study, right? So it could be due to any other factors as well. Variation could be due to situational factors. So normally I'm a cool, calm, collected person, but maybe today I'm feeling super anxious and being in this room is triggering me for some reason, right? We can have those situational factors. And it could be due to differences in how the research project is administered. So if we are collecting data at multiple times, let's say I want to do a pre-test, post-test. Again, we'll cover that research design later. But let's say I want to do that. Maybe I do it a little bit differently between the pretest and the post-test. That could cause some variation that could be a threat to my reliability and validity. Moving on to chapter 14, this is all about qualitative research. So qualitative research is going to focus on performances and practices of human communication, and we preserve the form and content of human interaction. So we want to focus on people in their natural habitats, in their normal performances, in their normal practices. So we observe them, we interview them, we use focus groups, we have narrative analysis, we might do content analysis, and even ethnography. So first, we talk about discourse. These are ways that we naturally talk, are gestures that we use naturally, and we capture that in a variety of forms and remains as it occurs. So we might take notes about certain groups of individuals and how they communicate. Then we have subjectivity. Researchers use interpretive processes to make the subject of the interpretation meaningful. So we as researchers must go through the process of interpretation. Excuse me, I apologize. Of interpretation. And that means that we have to be able to recognize what is actually being said, and we need to make that mean. So this is why in our qualitative research, you might see direct quotes. We have intersubjectivity, so social accomplishment of how people co-construct and co-experience interactions of social life and rules for doing so. With something like this, it's all about how do we co-create things? How do we talk to each other and create meaning with each other? We also talk about mutual simultaneous shaping. This is in the natural world, and it is kind of difficult to distinguish from cause and effect. So basically what this is about is we're saying that what you have done has shaped what I do, or what you said shapes what I say, or how I feel about something, because we are interdependent. We are mutually reliant on each other. Oops. So, what is qualitative research? We talk about inductive analysis. So, we use reasoning to discover and develop theories as they emerge from the data. So, we find our existing literature first, and then we write our purpose and our research questions, and then go into our data collection method. So, we're going into those focus groups. We're not handing out surveys, we're not quantifying things. Then we might enter this setting. What that means is we are going to start with data collection. And once we're done there, we might do interpretation and analysis. And we are validating members' experiences. And that all leads to the theories. And we use those as frameworks because we're saying this is what the data is telling us. So, some issues of credibility in qualitative research. First, what is credibility? Well, we talk about it as the extent to which interpretations can be validated as true, correct, or dependable. So, can other people find similar results? Depending on what you're studying, this might be easy to validate. However, if you are studying something very niche or something very specific to a region, it might be harder to get credibility in the recollection of data. So if I wanted to study the process of burning couches, that doesn't mean much to a lot of people around the world. But in West Virginia, where I did my graduate degree, it means that we've won a football game, we've lost a football game, or it's just a random day of the week. And it's also a felony if you're caught, right? You're probably not going to get those same reactions in any other part or any other culture. We talk about triangulation as well. So we use several kinds of methods or data to bring credibility to our findings. Because we can't replicate studies as easily with qualitative data, we use triangulation a lot. So data triangulation is using a variety of data sources and data types in one study. So we can be more confident that about our findings and our conclusions are actually true and what we say they are. And then we also use investigator triangulation. This is where us as researchers participate in the research. And this allows for confidence in the findings because no result is dependent on one person's observations or interpretations. So the researcher is also part of it, but also showing, yes, this is a legit thing. Also, I apologize. You might hear another puppy barking. That's our other puppy. He's in his kennel right now and very upset because his brother has to get a bath and he does not like being by himself. So I apologize about that as well. Continuing with triangulation, we talk about interdisciplinary triangulation. So researchers form, it's supposed to say form, no, I apologize. I had it right on the slides. Researchers from a variety of disciplines are going to work together. So it is collaborative, and it's one of those where not one discipline is in charge, and therefore you can get a better sense of credibility. And then finally, member validation or member checks. We use this process by taking data that the research findings, and we take them to individuals from whom the data were collected and observed. So we take it back to them and say, this is what y'all are saying. Is this correct? And they can say, yeah, that hits the nail on the head. I apologize. That's not the correct way to say that. So it's one of those things that we take it directly to the source. So when we're assessing research questions, with qualitative data, because we're not quantifying things, we ask questions about how or what, and it's usually non-directional. So we should ask about specific types of interactions, how meaning is developed, issues that naturally occur, unanticipated phenomena and influences, processes that are going to occur over time, and particular communication contexts. So with that, we need to be making sure that our questions are asking how or what. How do these interactions happen? What is a typical interaction in this culture? Okay. We talk about research construction. So, from personal, subjective, or subjective position or perspective on the experience, the researcher develops interpretation, then the evidence is full of the construction of the researcher, right? So, what this means is the researcher is going to develop how things are interpreted and then put that evidence in a way that makes sense in an order to their study. So, it is constructed by the researcher. We see this a lot. So it sounds kind of ominous, but it's not. We have subjective valuing. This is the interpretation of meaning is going to rely on a mix of both objective and subjective elements. So things that, we can be completely objective about versus things where it's subjective, it depends on who the participant is. We talk about contingent accuracy as well. So we rely on tangible artifacts that we believe to be accurate representations of the phenomenon. So if we want to talk about religion, we might talk about wearing a cross necklace. Or maybe you want to talk about love and marriage and you talk about wedding bands. These are tangible artifacts, things that we can hold in our hands, things that symbolize something. Okay? And that is the end of week 2, module 2 slides. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out and I will be around if you need anything. And stop. Have a great week. Sorry about that long pause. That was awkward.